Hey everyone, it's Sean Melia Thompson here. I just wanted to give a quick at the top of this editorial. I'm counting this as episode 13, called it a lost episode 13, where it was a mini episode where we covered Midnight Gospels. Very technically, this probably fell somewhere in the middle of season 1, but this was a Patreon exclusive. And much like the other Patreon exclusives that I'm also going to be posting, I'm just going to lace them in where they seem to fit in the series themselves. So there was an episode we did about, say, torture porn. And we did another one, Chris and I, on Twin Peaks. So those are all going to just end up on this YouTube account. But I felt it was important to have this at the top, so you understand, if you go to the Spotify for Podcasts site, if you go to Apple Podcasts, this isn't on there. This isn't listed because it was a Patreon exclusive. So I hope you enjoy it. Okay, so welcome to Celluloid Citizens. This is going to be a mini episode or bonus content, however you want to think of it. Ostensibly, this will be behind a Patreon, some kind of paywall. But anyway, I'm Sean Thompson.
I'm Brian O'Connell.
And we're going to be discussing Midnight Gospel.
Yes.
Is it The Midnight Gospel?
The Midnight Gospel.
The Midnight Gospel, created by the creator of Adventure Time. It's currently on Netflix.
Yeah, Penn Ward, and co-created with Duncan Trussell, who I believe this show's derived from his podcast.
Okay, that would make sense, yeah, because I was going to say, one of the things I love about this show is that it's very clearly like interviews that they decided to animate.
Yeah, with like seamlessly woven in actual written dialogue, so you can't really discern the line when it's scripted and when it's just a natural conversation that they've animated.
Yeah, and I'll admit, when I first went into this, it was like, you recommended it, but I was like, oh, I don't know. I like Adventure Time, but I'm not the hugest Adventure Time fan, because I guess the tone of it can be a little like cutesy and childish for me sometimes.
Well, it is a bias for me because Adventure Time literally was my childhood.
Yeah, the thing is, I came to Adventure Time as a 30-year-old man. You came to it as a child.
And Adventure Time remains probably tied with BoJack for my favorite TV show that I've watched in its entirety. Because Adventure Time, this show gets into very esoteric, kind of mystical concepts. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I would say so. I think one of the really neat things is it goes into... It's fun to watch in a really stressful pandemic because it goes into Buddhist philosophy and dealing with being imprisoned by studying magic and mysticism and things of that nature. And it's very soothing in that regard.
Yeah. What I was getting at was that these subjects were actually touched upon in a few of the mid to late Adventure Time episodes. But while this show has a clear relation, it's so much more aggressively weird and obviously adult.
They're swearing, they're saying fucking shit all the time. So clearly it's not for children.
And there's appearances...
Or at least not nice children.
But, when I was a little thrown off by it because I didn't know anything about the context other than that.
Yeah, when you go into it, I didn't know what to expect because then it was you and then Scott R. Jones mentioned it.
Oh, yeah.
And his writing's great. And I'm like, all right. And then someone, I forgot who, but so by the time I went into it though, I was like, all right, well, Brian was a child when he watched this and Scott is children. So maybe it's like for children.
No.
I thought maybe it's like, yeah, which nothing wrong with that. And then like the first 5 minutes, it's this guy like sticking his head in a weird intergalactic, like, looks like a butthole kind of thing to shoot himself into a different simulated universe. And it's like, okay, this is not for children.
Well, I mean, so I was kind of bowled over initially because there are two things going on in every episode. There's the conversation Duncan Trussell, who here plays a character named Clancy, is having with whoever his guest is. And then there's the actual animation, which is, it's aggressively surreal stuff.
Which is just batshit.
Designed by, the art director is Jesse Moynihan, who worked on Adventure Time and is an absolute brilliant artist.
He is. There's no denying that. And we also previously covered a Goofy movie, and God, what a breath of fresh air to go from a Goofy movie to this, where it's like actively trying to push the form of animation like use the medium.
Yeah.
And versus like, hey, here's the same crappy animation of water.
Oh yeah. It's very like, and there are just honestly breathtaking sequences in this for me, where it's just so impressive, just the level of energy and animation in just the design of it all. And meanwhile, at the same time, you're trying to absorb the content of what the actual like voices are saying. And that initially was kind of difficult for me to be like, on the one hand, the first episode is about...
It's with Dr. Drew, who plays a small president, like a literally tiny little man.
Yeah, it's a zombie apocalypse simulation that he goes into. And they're just talking about... They start off talking about drugs and then eventually just go into meditation and various Buddhist philosophies. And it's just... It's a lot to absorb at once because obviously you have these like just two tracks running at the same time. But I eventually got into the groove of it, and I love it.
Yeah, I would say it does take you maybe an episode or two to get into the swing of it, but by the time they got to the one with, and I didn't realize this, but the episode where I think it's the ice cream planet.
Yeah.
I want to say it's the third one.
Is it the Damien Eccles planet?
Yeah, I had no idea, but it's one of the West Memphis 3.
So
who was wrongfully imprisoned.
Going
into how he got into magic to deal with being in a cage, and it's like so profound. But then the animation is like he's like a goldfish in a bowl that has a suit.
There are cats,
like a body, like a robot body. And he has a cat crew sailing a ship.
Playing organs.
And I can't even, like, it gets so convoluted, I don't even know how else to describe. A lot of things happen.
I just on that specific episode, I didn't know who Damien Eccles was or the West Memphis 3. And the whole time he's alluding to his...
They have a documentary about the West Memphis 3, which I would recommend everybody watch. I actually haven't watched it yet because it seems like it's going to be so heavy, but...
Oh, I'll check that out.
I've heard it's very good, and God, the case is just talk about, like, the power of perception and the satanic panic and all of that crap.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I was like, when they were talking... He kept alluding to the fact that, oh yeah, I've been in jail. And I was like, oh, what was he in jail for? And then I look it up and it's just this utterly insane story. But at any rate, I think for me, the second episode was, I loved the first episode, but the second episode really sealed the deal for me because they're talking about death and grieving and the process of accepting that. And the whole time, the characters are being murdered and put into, like, a processed meat machine.
Yeah, they're being turned into, like, hamburger, some kind of processed meat.
And that is, like, that's, like, a moment where the style and the substance really sync up. And I think one of the beauties of animation is to have this discussion that's very profound and intimate about death and grief, while visually representing like a sort of death and murderous atmosphere with like the demonic clowns and like all of the terrorism.
I think during that episode I told my girlfriend this kind of plays like Super Jail for Buddhists.
I don't know Super Jail.
Just in terms of the animation style and it being very kinetic and surreal and just like moving a mile a minute, and I love Super Jail, but Super Jail is much more trying to be like an Adult Swim show. Like its conceit is much more like for entertainment rather than maybe, and not that Midnight Gospel isn't for entertainment, but like it's obviously a much more scripted like kind of a thing, whereas this one is more about having this interesting mix of these interviews with people about very profound subjects while also having very outlandish art.
And some of the stuff really is very profound too. Like the grief episode and the occult episode is kind of blowing my mind with Damien Eccles. Just the way he describes, it's not a philosophy I adopt, but the way he talks about like, I don't know, what was it that like he felt he could look over the whole world from his cell or something because of these practices and that.
Yeah, he got into astral projection and he felt like he didn't feel like he was in prison.
Yeah, I mean, it's like really, it's fascinating stuff. And I think the animation, I suppose this is the purpose of the show, but the animation adds an extra context to it that wouldn't be there if you were just listening to the podcast. And that's the value of it ultimately.
Yeah, and obviously we are podcasters. You're new to this.
We are.
I had a show before called Miskatonic Musings I did for about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I had a very brief stint doing something called Spooky Sean's Podcastery, which was essentially just an interview show with horror writers and artists and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
But podcasting for me went from being just a thing to try to get my writing out there, which was in the early days of Miskatonic Musings. I'm a horror writer, which I don't bring up because it doesn't really pertain to the podcast. But initially it was just a way like, oh, maybe people will listen to it and it'd be a way to promote my writing. And podcasting very quickly, it started becoming something that I looked at as a separate art form, like almost like radio and like the things you can do with I think the beauty of podcasts is that you can really help people that are very lonely, that just need that sort of feeling of being in a social situation. Like you're just listening to people at a bar or you're listening to people at a park, just having an interesting conversation. You're sitting around with friends. And I think that's part of the beauty of Midnight Gospel.
Yeah.
You have that
in
terms of the audio stimuli. And it's just like these really interesting conversations. But then on the artistic side, it's just like blowing your mind with all of these weird things.
And I think like the animations almost function as like a symbolic representation of the feeling of being in a conversation with a person, that it's this like journey through various environments and it's unpredictable, and the ideas that are arising are engaging and surprising and interesting. And I think that I don't know if I've seen it done before or something like this, but the meld of these two mediums really does credit to the podcast as an art form, as you phrased it.
I do, and I don't think everyone thinks of podcasting as an art form.
And also but this is, this unquestionably.
But this is an art form. I've seen sort of on a small scale, I've seen it. Like, for instance, I listen to a show called Last Podcast on the Left, and they have a big fan base, so there's animations online of them.
Oh, yeah.
Or something like I think it's called My Brother and Me. There's some animations of that, which is also an interesting podcast.
It's, what is it? Game Grumps, who I don't watch. My brother used to watch them when he was younger. But, like, fan animation of their conversations is a huge thing. And I think it's very interesting to see this kind of concept. I mean, we've talked before about the benefits of streaming services, but this kind of concept given a chance, not just as like a fan animation or like a web thing, but as an actual show and like something worthy of its own attention and like dignity that comes with a show.
Yeah, and you might see something like this on an Adult Swim. I love Adult Swim, by the way.
I do too.
But I don't know, because it isn't necessarily, as much as I like shows like, Rick and Morty or Super Jail or any other, Aqua Teen Hunger Force, stuff like that. This show isn't really tonally in line with those.
This is easily one of the weirdest things. And
I mean, it's not even just the weirdness, though, in terms of the sincerity and like the genuine like openness and emotionality of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It doesn't really match anything I've seen on Adult Swim. In terms of just strictly emotionality, possibly something like Primal, which they had, which is it's a caveman. But that one's much more just all about the animation.
Yeah. I mean, this really isn't it isn't ironic at all, really. It's a very generous, I mean, it's humorous, but...
Yeah, and sometimes it's tongue-in-cheek, but it's not like a Rick and Morty where the entire thing is like supposed to be sarcastic and tongue-in-cheek. Like, there's some genuine...
profundity.
Profound moments.
Yeah, and it just makes me wonder what the chances are that it'll get picked up for another, because I'm not optimistic. Another season, I should say.
I don't know, but the thing is, there's been so many shows on streaming that have gotten other seasons, and I've never known how.
I've read some awful, horrible article. Not horrible because of the writing, but just because of the fact included. That Netflix's algorithm has determined that 2 seasons are the best amount for a show, because that's what gets you the most new subscribers, right?
Yeah.
So, like, people who are already subscribed will see the first season, some buzz will accumulate, and then people will join to see the second season. But after the second season, the amount of new people joining kind of levels out, and that's why Netflix axes so many shows after 2 or 3 seasons.
Well, that's not great.
Yeah, as happened with Santa Clarita Diet. Oh God,
which is a shame because I love that show so much.
I loved that show. I am so mad that I mean, I enjoyed it while it lasted, but to take it away from me, I mean,
I'm personally just very pissed off that when Lucifer was canceled on Fox, Netflix picked it up, right?
Right.
Exorcist was canceled from Fox, and I've just for years have been like, come on, Netflix, just do a 3rd season of Exorcist.
And no.
And they just haven't, and I just feel like it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
And it makes me very sad.
I mean, there is something suspicious to me about the way, not suspicious, I guess, but something odd to me about the way they handled the final season of BoJack. That it was like, very abruptly, okay, this is the last season, and we're gonna split it into 2 parts, and I don't know, it just felt like an odd, and I think Raphael Bob Waksberg, who is the creator and I believe the showrunner, stated that it wasn't they didn't necessarily have the time they wanted to close the show, and that they had to like cut some corners. So, I mean, Netflix, we've extolled its virtues before, but...
It's not without fault. It's still functioning under a capitalist society, and they are still trying to get subscribers. Their thing is subscribers as opposed to ad revenue.
Yeah, and that's...
So in some ways that's better, because it means they can take chances to try to get subscribers that maybe wouldn't sign up for, say, Santa Clarita Diet. They might sign up for Midnight Gospel.
Yeah. Although, I mean...
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't know who, like, other than me, I don't know who would sign up for...
Midnight Gospel, I love it dearly. Who is the market?
I mean, me and you and, like, 5 other weird writers, and that would be it.
Like, how many people are genuinely going to get attached to this? I don't know. I mean, I think they released it on 420 for a reason, so there's a clear audience they're shooting for with it, but... I don't see it. I mean, I hope it gets another season. I sincerely do. And I hope more people just let Pendleton Ward make things, because I'll say it again, Adventure Time, to me, is one of the greatest shows ever that I've ever seen.
I never watched it back to back. I feel like if I actually did give it the time to go from beginning to end.
Yeah.
I do love the show. It's just I've seen them out of sequence. I watch them much more as like, this looks like kind of like regular show. I haven't seen regular show in entirety either.
Well, the thing about Adventure Time that is interesting to me is that, and worth keeping in mind, is that like the early seasons are very kid-oriented and very humor-oriented. And there was a point where the showrunner, Adam Muto, I forget which season it was, but he stated that they changed being funny after a point was no longer the show's main goal. And I think in the middle seasons especially, it took a direction that is both more mature and also just, for a kid, totally mind-bending. Because I mentioned Jesse Moynihan. Some of the episodes he storyboarded for Adventure Time,
Yeah.
there's like occult elements to them. There's nihilistic and spiritual elements to them. And some of it is just totally like, and like watching that as a kid changes you. Like, it's like, I mean, I would recommend a few episodes specifically, to start with if you're considering the idea of like jumping back into it.
I suppose the closest analog I would have in terms of stuff I've watched as a child that was animated would be The Simpsons.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, Pendleton Ward has often said that, and honestly, most of the animators at Cartoon Network have stated that The Simpsons was what made them want to do this as an industry.
Yeah, and it's similar in that the early seasons of The Simpsons, I mean, it was based off of a segment on the Tracy Ullman Show, and they were basically caricatures. You know, you had the fat dad and you had the prankster son, and that they eventually started to gain genuine personalities, and they eventually, as the show went on, got more popular. They started to tackle like legitimate stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that especially kids shows have been really getting better at doing. Like, I mean, Adventure Time, and also, I guess more prominently, Steven Universe, are addressing issues that previously would have been untouchable in like children's animation.
Probably,
like,
yeah.
I mean, both Adventure Time and Steven Universe have like gay or queer relationships. There are like Adventure Time tackles like depression and like, you know, self-destructive behavior in ways that feel totally unique to children's animation. And I think they may have taken a page from The Simpsons in that you can start to use this medium to address serious issues and actual lofty concepts, which the Midnight Gospel is doing, although it is not for children. And neither was The Simpsons, of course, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
No, I get what you're saying. So let's wrap this up because it's supposed to be a shorter little mini episode. I would definitely recommend Midnight Gospel. I'm not entirely done with it yet. I think I have maybe 2 more episodes left, but I've loved the hell out of it.
I'm like a little over halfway through. There are only like 8 episodes.
I believe so, yeah.
I hear the 8th one is really emotionally impactful, so I'm excited to watch it. But I would give this a blanket recommendation. It definitely isn't for everyone. I'm not going to pretend like everybody could get into this show.
No, I don't think my mom would get into this, for instance.
Yeah.
Maybe my dad. I think, but like my sister, who's turning 30 soon, actually. She's 27th, huh? I would, recommend it to her. I feel like someone like my sister or me, like, this show is made for them, for us.
Yeah. And if the first one puts you off, maybe keep with it just to get into the style.
Yeah, because the first one is much more just like about drug use, and like I could see how someone who doesn't do drugs would be like.
I saw somebody on,
or even people that don't like. I mean, I'm a recovering addict, so I have my issues with hearing about drugs.
Yeah,
but.
There was a tweet I saw saying that as a person with anxiety, and I can relate to this wholeheartedly. They were put off by the first episode because it reminded them of people who tell you like meditation is the way to solve your problems. And I totally understand that.
I get that. Yeah, no, I do.
It is kind of has ties to that like new agey sphere of things, but I do think it gets better as the episodes continue, and even you could honestly just shut off the conversation and just watch it unfold before you.
And just watch it strictly for the animated side. Yeah, there's some...
You would lose nothing.
Wild stuff. There's, like, the one with the ship.
Yeah.
It's like cats piloting a ship, and then they're using, like, cat energy to, like, use a fist to punch through ice, and then there's like giants fighting, and
there's one of the most striking scenes is when he's talking about, like, I don't know, something about, like, you know, death and then the next phase of existence or whatever. He's being absorbed into this giant's brain in, like, a maze or something, and it's breathtaking imagery. So if any of that interests you, I would strongly encourage to at least give it a try, because stuff like this just doesn't get made very often, and it's important to support it when it does turn up.
Yeah, it's important. So anyway, this has been the very first, hopefully of many, mini episode of Celluloid Citizens. I'm Sean M. Thompson.
I'm Brian O'Connell.
And stay tuned. Have a good night.